is live from the table, the official podcast of New York's world famous Comedy Cellar, coming at you on Sirius XM 99 Raw Dog. And on the Laugh Button Podcast Network, Dan Natterman here with Pierre Aschenbrand, our producer. She's also an on-air personality. That wasn't the original intention. She just kind of came to be. Noam Dworman, owner of the world famous Comedy Cellar, is present and accounted for. We have with us an old friend and Comedy Cellar podcast veteran and alumni, Dove Davidoff is here. Real estate entrepreneur, actor, and comedian is with us. We do want to discuss at the top of the show before our other guest, Dave Zwei, gets here, the recent death of Norm Macdonald. Died at the age of 61 after a long battle of cancer of an unknown type. No one knew he was sick. I guess he kept it secret from pretty much everybody. His doctors obviously knew. I don't know. I assume his family knew, but a few others knew. And of course, there was an outpouring of support and love for Norm. That is, I think, rather rare in the comedy world. I mean, you know, when comics die, he was beloved, but he was more beloved than most. I mean, not since Robin Williams have I personally witnessed this level of outpouring.
I agree.
Of love and admiration and adulation.
Wow.
Adulation.
For a comic, than is the case with Norm. Noam is busy on his phone, tapping away. I don't know what he's up to.
This is important. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, do you think Norm knew how adored he was?
Oh, I don't know. I met Norm one time, and only one time. Since people like to share their Norm stories, mine is not. I only have one. I met him. I was opening for him about 15 years ago or so. It was at the beginning of the social media era, and MySpace was new, and he was completely befuddled by it. And I just briefly talked with him backstage. He goes, "Yeah, it's Dane Cook. He's on MySpace asking people to be his friend. What's that about?" So he was sort of befuddled by the whole notion of friend requests on MySpace, and that was all we really talked about. And then I opened for him, and he did his joke about how people say my son is gay, and I'm proud that my son is gay. And he said, "Well, I can see you being proud of your son that happens to be gay, but I don't know why people would be like, hey, you know, my son, he's getting good grades at school. He just made the football team. Oh, yeah, you know what else? He loves cock." So anyway, that's.
By the way, Periel told me she'd be proud if her son was gay. She'd be proud if her son is trans. I made the same thing. Like, aren't you going overboard? Like who cares, right? You don't care if your son's gay, but proud of him, like it's an accomplishment, or like she'd prefer it if her son were gay.
I don't know,
which I think is heterophobic.
I don't know if I'd prefer it, but I would be thrilled if my son were gay.
Why thrilled?
Because
as opposed to being straight.
Because in her social circles, people would elevate her.
Yeah, that would elevate the status.
She'd become a big star.
Yes, she's homosexual.
That has nothing to do.
My mother's like that too.
Your mother's amazing.
Wow, that's one word for it.
Because also he'd never leave me.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
They make good sons.
Oh, you're stereotyping gay people?
They make good sons. All of my gay guy friends are amazing to their moms, as opposed to my mother-in-law hates me.
But it's
all
unlikely
about
you'd be a grandmother.
Yeah.
It's unlikely you'd be a grandmother unless you adopted.
I've got several gay couple friends who have kids. Yeah.
I mean, more and more. Like, look, what's his name? Just had a kid. Buttigieg and what's his name?
Christian Chastity? No.
So much for Norm Macdonald, huh?
We'll get back to Norm. We're just basically saying that more and more people are having kids that are gay.
Chasen?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But getting back to Norm, the most impressive thing, I as oftentimes happens when people die, I go on YouTube and I do a bit of a deep dive. And Norm, there was some, a lot of videos on YouTube that people have been watching. The one that impressed me the most, personally, was Norm's performance at the Bob Saget roast. Now, people roast most of the time. They're trying to get the biggest laughs possible with the most edgy, gut punch jokes that they can. Whereas Norm just went out and it was like performance art. It reminded me of Andy Kaufman. He went out and he did jokes that were ridiculously corny and soft. He wasn't trying to hurt anybody. So, for example, he said, he said, Greg Giraldo's got the eye of an eagle, the mind of a hawk, the whatever, something like that. And he goes, this guy's for the birds. And then like you said about Cloris Leachman, he said, Cloris Leachman, they say you're over the hill. Well, you'd never go over the hill with the car you drive. So it's just basically that kind of stuff.
Sort of vanilla material in an environment where everything is at an edge.
Or
with an edge.
Like Bazooka Joe bubblegum comic insults. Like, like that's it. As a matter of fact, I think he might have gotten them from a joke book or something like that.
Well, that may be. They sounded like joke book jokes.
Yeah.
But it was like performance art. It was like, here we are in an environment where everybody's trying to be as edgy as possible.
I think
and
part of
be
the loss.
Like,
we'll be with you in just 1 second. Sorry. Go ahead.
We'll put a button on it. Was that there was an innocence, almost kind of a naivete, but he wasn't. He was very intellectually curious, read a lot, but Norm was somebody who was less concerned with a lot of things people are concerned about.
He was hilarious.
No, and deeply funny.
No. I didn't.
Yes.
I like the Bob Saget roast, but some of those appearances, like on Conan, where he tells long,
original
long
and
jokes.
funny. Yeah. An original voice, which is very rare.
I really am curious about this idea that, people have this outpouring of love and respect and admiration after you die. But I really do wonder if he knew how beloved he was while he was alive. And
do you know how beloved you are, Periel?
I do, actually. probably less than I imagined.
I think he had a good idea. He had a very robust career, and I think he probably, got a lot of praise whilst he was alive. And
I don't know that he could feel it. I think that, which is probably a common theme with a lot of people that do humor, is that they can't feel it regardless.
He had fans that were obsessed with him, too.
Yes.
Hey, but it's a great show, Star Search. You ever watch that show? God damn. That is an excellent show. Excellent. I'll tell you what the best thing about Star Search is. You get to see the stars of tomorrow today. You don't have to wait an extra day. My favorite things on Star Search is the junior dancers. Those are my favorite, I love those junior dancers because I like how Ed introduces them, It's always like, hot property! Then they all come dancing. Too cute for you! The funny thing about the junior dancers is it's not like if they win, they're going to go on to become junior dancers. Like, there's no place in show business for that, It's not like you're ever hanging out. Hey, honey, what do you want to do tonight? Go see a movie or something? Or maybe grab a beer down at the bar or something? Hey, I know a good thing. Hey, why don't we go to that new joint they got down on Main Street there? That's a good club. They got 6-year-olds dancing. Yeah, I understand Hot Property's going to be there tonight. They're good. Yeah, that's right, little children. Yeah, they're better live than on TV, I've heard. They're good, they're dancing. That's right, little children dancing. Come on, honey, get your coat, let's go. We got to beat the...
Look at this. This is edibles.
Yeah, look at that.
Is that what you were texting about when you were like,
that's not
this
what I
is
was
important?
texting about. I was texting about somebody who tested asymptomatic positive for COVID.
All right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay?
That's
Highly hungry.
I
Highly
need
hungry.
this to calm it down.
Calm it down.
All right. So,
Mr. Zweig is here.
Okay, should I introduce our guest?
And Mark Normand, Mark Normand is a huge Norm Macdonald fan, and he took it very, very hard. I thought we would get him on the podcast, but I guess he wasn't available or he didn't want to talk about it. But I can't read your eyes, Pearl. It's not a hostage video. What?
I mean, he didn't write me back.
Oh, he didn't write you back.
I thought maybe he was out of town.
All right.
Anyway, let me introduce David Zweig, who just joined us. David Zweig is a contributor to, I think, one of Noam's favorite magazines, The Atlantic, also New York Magazine, Wired, and the New York Times, among other outlets, and the author of the nonfiction book Invisibles. He's also working on a book about the pandemic called An Abundance of Caution. You can follow him on Twitter at David Zweig. Zweig is spelled Zweig. EIG, I before E, except after C, or in
Sounded like A as in
whatever. But in this case, it's ZWEIG. David Zweig,
neighbor
welcome.
and gay.
David Zweig, how are you?
Whatever.
Good. This is already an amazing beginning because I've heard my name pronounced perfectly by multiple people
There you
all
go.
in one sitting. It's
Yeah,
like I
yeah.
should just leave now.
How do they say? They say Zweig?
No, they
Zweig?
just said it correctly.
No, but how do other people say it?
Oh, I mean, it runs the gamut.
Yeah.
Zweig,
Zweig,
swag,
Zweig,
Zweig,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So this is
Before-
already exciting for me.
Before I begin, we just was wondering if you had any. We can talk about it later. If you have any opinions about the Gabrielle Petito case, and we can make some time at the end to discuss it. If not, then we won't. But
I'm not even familiar.
okay, never mind.
Yeah, no,
I'm not
nor am
either.
I. Nor am
It's the
I.
biggest story in the
It's a
country.
Oh, it is?
huge-
What is
huge
this?
story.
Well, it hit Dan very hard. Nobody else seems to be
It's one of
following.
these. It's one of these gossipy murder cases. Like
Is this a pretty young white girl that was
Oh, the one who's missing.
she's
or-
missing, but
or
she was found murdered, and of course the number one suspect is her age-appropriate boyfriend. So I'm just saying.
The only thing I saw about it was someone had tweeted or said on air that it was something like, well, of course, because this was a white girl. And
Yes, that's the controversy.
That's the controversy.
The controversy is
Yeah.
is the media more likely to talk about a missing white girl than a missing woman of color?
And the answer is yes.
And the answer is yes.
Yes,
The
I
answer
think
is yes.
Although none of you guys have any idea what's going on, so apparently maybe not.
Well, it depends. Right, it depends what you call
Yeah.
the media. It's like you know what
Right.
you know. There could be like a giant story that, right? Like 30 years ago, there would be a huge story, and everyone would know that story in the same way that everyone watched
Yeah.
Seinfeld. I don't think anything is huge anymore in the same way that it used to be. So even the biggest story
Yeah,
in the
that's
country
right. Yeah.
doesn't reach the same number of people in the same way that the biggest story of the country would have 20 or 30 years ago.
That's correct. Also, Mr. Zweig is a sinologist, and so this is not what the story you really want to communicate about with him. You want to get into what he's.
well,
what-
well, if
I
it's
just wanna
analogous,
say-
he's from China. He studies China.
But there's a lot going on in China right now, for God's sake.
I just
no,
want to say.
Hold on. That is a different David Zweig. Just to let you know.
Okay.
No, my bad.
No. This is.
That's David
What comes
Zweig.
up right away. That's
David
Zweig.
Zweig, you
My
idiot.
bad.
There-
Yeah.
There's like
Yeah, yeah.
at least 5 David Zweigs. So one
Oh.
of them is a guy who
They're all smart. You guys have a lot of writers
Yes,
named
a lot,
Zweig.
a lot of David Zweig. So that is a different. But if you Google, it's like his picture with my bio. It's like
Right.
this weird
I
mishmash.
can't
so
believe
you
I
are
found
fully,
you.
Right,
fully
right. I'm
yes,
not
I'm
guilty.
impressed. That
I'm impressed.
You got the wrong fucking David Zweig, you idiot.
you wanted to talk about China. I apologize. Yeah.
I just want to say, I'm
I'll do my
thinking about
best.
this black woman of color thing and it's certainly possible, but there are other probably variables. One is the so tell me, was she?
She looks like Kirsten Dunst, so she's very pretty.
She's beautiful. Are they like wealthy or like
No.
what are they?
No,
So
but-
the added angle is attractiveness. It's not just white, right?
Well, like for instance, like Tawana Brawley was a huge story.
Huge.
She was
Yeah,
a
that
black
was
woman.
30 years ago.
I know that, but then well, I don't want to say. Then it was the woman in Chicago who we actually know. That was a big story, not as big as this. But you're right. There's like, what was it, Chandra Levy or something? Was that the one?
well, they call it missing
But that's
white.
because there was a congressman involved.
Missing white woman syndrome is what some have named it.
Right. So I'm asking, like, list a few of the other missing white women.
Lauren Spiegel.
I never heard of her.
It was a huge,
Well,
huge story.
Smart. That girl's
Elizabeth Smart.
Elizabeth
Smart.
Smart.
What was story?
She
I've
was
heard
the
of her.
one in she was
Mormon.
Mormon girl that was abducted, and they found her alive after she had been taken basically hostage and
By aliens.
by
And are there
Yes.
stories?
I thought it was, yeah.
And then when there's a story with the police, with the woman who was shot with the knock warrant, or it turned out not to be a knock warrant. What's her name?
yes.
Breonna Taylor.
Right.
But that's a police story, so yes, that's different. But are there stories that we know about of black girls who were in the same situation that weren't covered?
I think some of it's socioeconomic too. I think when you hear somebody went missing in the South Bronx, people go missing in apartment buildings. I mean, when you're in certain neighborhoods, it's a lot of people get shot. A lot of people. It's not big news. If you have 10 shootings inside of 30 days, it's no longer big news if there's an 11th shooting.
So if you
On the
think
Upper East Side,
you think
you
of
get
like
shot, it's big news. That's
right?
a
But that's
function
not
of-
the only place black people live. You think like if an upper middle class pretty black woman in a
It has nothing to do with the only place black people live. My analogy is about where shootings are common and where they're not,
Right, but I'm
as a
at-
function of.
I understand that.
Airplay.
But I'm asking, do you think that if it was like a similar socioeconomic story.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All the
They'd
variables
follow.
the same.
Yeah. If
But
Jay-Z's
but the
kid
girl
gets
is-
kidnapped, believe me, it'll be on the front page of every
Jay-Z
story.
that's like,
I'm
Lindbergh.
making I'm making a grand analogy. If somebody from a upper middle class neighborhood,
You think if it's a
cute
one-to-one
black girl
comparison,
and a thing,
if the only difference is race, you think it would be covered
there
the
may
same
be
way.
there may be another variable difference. I don't know what value to place on the metric, but I certainly know that depending on the number of people and the degree of chaos in the current environment, that will correlate with the amount of airplay that story gets.
I think that all other variables held equal, the white girl gets more coverage. But my question is how important is media coverage to the resolution of these cases?
It's very important.
And the fact of the matter is we can't give,
Can sometimes screw them up.
we couldn't possibly give every missing person, there's not enough eyeball hours. It's a word I made up. I don't know. Eyeball hours. There are not enough eyeball hours.
EOs,
in
we
it.
call it. EHs.
Is that, what does that mean?
Eyeball hour.
Okay. There's not enough eyeball hours in a day to give every disappearing person a lot of media coverage.
I don't think
That's
a lot
not-
of people disappear.
That's not the point. Yes, there
So-
are.
So, what we need to focus on is not giving huge media coverage to everybody that disappears. We need to focus on making sure law enforcement does its job with equal force and with equal robustness for all victims.
All right, let's talk about COVID.
But do you have any comment to that?
I agree with you.
It's never happened. Socioeconomics always plays a
I'm
part.
open to the sociological truth of what the premise of the conversation. I'm not. I don't know if that's racism or
Do you
if
think
it's
a poor
just,
white person in West Virginia goes missing? He's going to get the same coverage as some hedge fund guy's kid on the Upper East
He
Side?
won't get
Of
the same
course
coverage,
not.
but will
So
the
it's
same-
not just a function of race, though that's certainly a factor.
But it's
mean,
not just a matter
there's
of
a
will he
lot of
get the-
nuance.
I mean, the
he'll
media
get
right
the
now
coverage,
is-
but
is
will
Zweig agrees with me. What do you know?
he won't get the same coverage, perhaps, but will the law enforcement give him the same treatment? Which I think
No,
is
of course not. If Noam's kid gets kidnapped, it'll be a much bigger story and probably more, of course, law enforcement kind of focus than if a guy who's was just convicted of a meth felony and his kids are, he's sort of in and out and he's got 7 kids and they don't know what. It's
But-
Suffice it to
socioeconomic.
say, we're guessing and we really don't know. This.
I think but my point is, I think what's
Shit, I
more
know.
important is the response of law enforcement, not the response of the media.
I just fear that. Then with the COVID thing, I just fear, not fear. I think that when a story has a good, interesting, gossipy plot line,
Cute young Mormon.
that would make
Yeah.
a good movie, for whatever
Yes.
reason,
Yes.
that grabs attention. And and these stories that we know that have become like national things, they've all been interesting in one way or another. It's been more than just the fact
Absolutely.
that it was somebody white, because we presume for every one of these white girl disappearing stories that grabs the attention of the country, there are
Yes.
probably a few dozen that
The
nobody
hot
cared
broad
about,
gets
right?
the attention. You know that.
Yeah. Oh, and then was it Casey Anthony? She was hot.
Yes.
And then Scott Peterson.
It's more correlated
He
with-
was hot. And
More correlated with looks than it
Casey
is
Anthony
color.
was
Probably
super hot.
That's what I'm telling you.
she was hot.
She murdered her fucking 2-year-old daughter.
Benadryl. It was a little extra
A
Benadryl.
light
And you
Benadryl.
guys are really missing the forest for the trees.
Okay,
It
co-
is totally a function of systemic racism.
Well-
Okay, well, that's fine. So let me ask you this: let's say there was just dealing with the white cases. What do you account for? How do you account for the difference in the coverage between the various white girls who get?
Well, I think that in part what you're saying is true, is that it's attractiveness, it's socioeconomic, but also the media is primarily white, and they are more attracted to these stories of these white girls.
Right, but how do you account?
think they're more
for-
attracted
hold on,
to
hold on.
clicks.
She's a what?
To-
But leaving the race issue out, let's just take the white universe of these stories.
Okay.
How do you account for the drastic difference in that universe?
Well, I think it's what you said.
That's the hot girl.
Well,
Looks
it's
and
the
socioeconomic.
story, it's the hot girl, it's what's going to get
Right.
clicks,
So
right?
so whatever the reason that this white girl got more attention than all other white girls, why would that not be the same reason this white girl got more attention than the black girls?
Well, I mean, because I don't think you ever hear about black girls who go missing.
Well, I named a couple off the top of my head.
No, you didn't. You named one.
No, there was a woman in Chicago. I don't want to say her name because
They don't make national stories.
This
like
was a national story.
Any of the girls. that
You
were
don't, because you don't read. Anyway, you don't care. That's why. you only read about the white girls. That's why you don't know about them. All right.
Okay.
So, Mr. Zweig, I heard you on. Was it on? We were on Megyn Kelly.
I was.
I heard you on
Yes.
Megyn Kelly, and you were throwing a lot of cold water on the idea that kids should wear masks, or that it's been properly and scientifically proven that kids should wear masks in schools. And just full disclosure, I have a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 4-year-old all wearing masks. She has a 9-year-old, 8-year-old also wearing a mask. So this is a story close to home. So tell us a little bit. Give your spiel about the whole thing.
Your spiel.
My spiel.
Well, because I heard on Megyn Kelly, and he gave it, and he also that's what he has to do. He has to give a synopsis of his story.
Yes,
So go ahead.
understood. Yeah, I mean, I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, so this is important to me too.
Okay.
And so I wrote an article for New York Magazine about masks, and specifically the lack of evidence that mask mandates in schools are effective. And I approach this apolitically. I've been writing about COVID and children in schools and sort of the nexus between kids, schools, and COVID since the spring of 2020. And I've always approached this sort of apolitically. I just want to find out, what does the data show? What is the evidence? What's going on here?
Isn't it a funny time that you have to say?
I know I have to give my preamble.
No,
about,
I approach
Yes.
the cure to cancer apolitically.
Yes.
Like,
I'm compelled to say I'm not anti-mask. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not a Republican operative. I'm not once I do all that throat clearing.
What a time. Go ahead.
Yes,
What a time.
I mean, that's a whole other story, but which kind of ties into this. I mean, the blowback that I get as a journalist in sort of, I guess, what you would call the prestige media. I mean, it is challenging. So, but I think it's important to try to, rather than just writing for an audience who's already kind of excited about, who already is predisposed to believe something or think it. I'm fortunate enough to be able to write for places where, at least on this topic, the audience is probably more skeptical of some of this. So what I looked at was there was a study that published by the CDC, and it was of 90,000 students in Georgia. I forget how many schools, something like 160 something schools. And there are essentially no studies that compare schools with masking mandates versus schools without masking mandates, or a variety of other mitigation measures from, HEPA filters and barriers, this, that, and the other. There's very, very little bit where you're doing what you would call like a cohort study where you're comparing. Almost all of the studies that people point to are, masks work in schools, but they're doing masks plus a bunch of other things, and they're not comparing it to anything else. There's a study out of Duke that got a ton of attention where they said they looked at, I forget, it was like 1 million students. It was a huge thing. But they didn't have a comparator. There was no control group. It's just so if everyone's wearing a mask and they said, look, and the cases were low, surely it's because of the mask. But you can't, that's not how science works. You can't do 5 different things and say, oh, it's because of thing number 2 that's why it worked. You don't know that. So and the history of medicine and science is littered with examples where people were positive that they knew X, was happening. And then it turned out later that that's not the case. Until you do a randomized control trial or other sort of comparative studies of some sort, it's very challenging to make any sort of claim when you're doing multiple things. So here's the interesting thing. The CDC puts out a study, does not get a lot of attention, but because I'm a crazy research person, I read everything. And this study was of 90,000 students, and they actually did compare schools with mask mandates to some schools that didn't have mask mandates. And what they found was there was no statistically significant benefit of the schools that did mandate masks for students. Interestingly, what they also found was there was no statistically significant benefit for HEPA filters, for barriers, or for distancing. These are sort of like, this is like almost like, heresy to say this. And in the summary at the top of the study, which of course is the only thing that most people read, journalists, they just kind of tend to look at the summary, the abstract. They mentioned that masking teachers did provide a benefit. That's what's in the summary. And that ventilation, from like getting fresh air, that also they saw a benefit. But what they left out of the summary were all these other what are called null findings, which means where you don't find a statistically significant benefit. And I thought, man, that's kind of insane. They leave out. It's just as important to not find something and mention that than to only mention the things that you do find.
Would you say that was political?
I mean, it's hard to imagine any reason, and this is not my opinion. I talked to a whole variety of experts on this, and I quote a few of them in the article, and they said that is in their mind, that was totally inappropriate because masks are such an important issue and HEPA filters and all this other stuff, to not mention that you didn't find a statistically significant benefit, to not also put that in your summary at the top of the study. I mean, that seems like a kind of a nonsensical decision.
It's intellectually dishonest, and so it's the manifestation of some politicization.
Could be, or just trying to get coverage for the study. Who knows?
I mean, so to me, look, and sure enough, look what happened. No one wrote about it. You took, me essentially, or I read the whole thing, and I'm like, oh, there we are. 1,000 or several thousand words in, then you start reading and you look at the tables where they put all this stuff. I'm like, oh, holy beep, and then I call up, at this point I have like a Rolodex of infectious disease people at Harvard and different places who I talk to practically every day. And I'm like, am I crazy, or am I reading this properly? And they're like, okay, let's go. So, and that kind of led me on the road. So, and then I wrote about this study for New York. And then on top of that, if you look at the CDC's guidance, I don't know if it's changed in the last month, but on their page, where they say, we recommend masking students in school, and there's a whole bunch of citations, where there's the little footnotes. I actually went through, clicked on every single citation that seemed to reference in some manner masking mandates and why they may be effective, that the CDC, here's our evidence for why we're making this recommendation. And you start clicking through and you start reading every one of these studies. I made a huge spreadsheet. I had an epidemiologist fact check me and go through it herself as well to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting something. Every one of these studies had either like the thing I mentioned about Duke, where there were masks in schools, but they were doing 5 other things at the same time. They listed studies where kids weren't wearing masks. Like I think it was in Switzerland or somewhere else. And I'm like, that was part of their proof for why you should wear masks in schools, was a study where no one was wearing them, where the kids weren't wearing masks. They did something with the hair salon. It was insane. I was like astonished that this is the evidence being given for why they want to do masks.
So let me ask you, and by the way, this I check footnotes a lot as well.
Good.
And it is not uncommon at all that the footnotes sometimes they are exactly the opposite of the point. We've seen that like very often. Exactly, I saw one
footnote
today.
says this is not valid. Checks will not be on.
Right.
There was an article in the urban something blog. It got some coverage about how objectivity is racist and blah blah blah. And anyway, it was a footnote to a study. And the study said exactly the opposite of what.
But isn't underlying?
But wait, okay.
Yeah.
So this is my thing. Do masks work for adults?
So the thing with masks is, one of the problems is we just use the word masks, but
N95 masks.
Right. So there is some pretty good evidence that some masks work on some people in some circumstances, and because that's really how you have to refer to it. N95s do seem to show a really good effect, particularly if they are fit tested, which is healthcare workers get these masks. Everyone remembers like all those images of the nurses and doctors where you saw their face all ripped up because they were wearing an N95. That's how an N95, when it's fit properly, it's sealed on your face so no air can get in around the edges. So,
okay, but what about KN95s, which are more, which is what I'm wearing right
Chinese
now?
version, yeah.
More, well, they're not.
Oh, you are a Chinese specialist.
They're not NIOSH approved. I mean, some of them are not Chinese because some of them are NIOSH approved.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay.
So the KN95s are more widely available. That's what I'm wearing right now. I mean, are those effective?
They appear to be similar
Somewhat
to a regular N95.
Right.
And even surgical masks masks appear to be somewhat effective. So where I'm
So,
going.
so there's N95s / K95s, surgical masks, and then there's the like cloth masks that you
Which
bought
is-
off of
right.
Etsy or
That's
like
not-
you know,
But this is
Amazon.
where I'm going with that.
Right.
Right.
That's not like
Hold on.
that's useless.
That
Hold
right.
on.
That does
Use
nothing,
that.
or
You-
not a lot.
Use it as a
It's
condom.
not
then.
useless. It says, I love Aruba.
That is important.
To communicate.
Hold on. Let me get to my point. here. Let me-
Communicates a valid point.
Hold on. So, I mean, if there was a study that showed that smoking caused cancer in adults, we wouldn't need or wouldn't expect a study on children before we assumed that it causes cancer in children. If I know masks are effective at protecting adults, why would
Some masks in some
in
circumstances.
some circumstances, why would I not assume that masks would also be effective with children?
Well, because
Why do I need a study just on children?
Right. No, it's a very good question, and that ties into what we were just talking about. Because I don't know about your kids, but almost all kids in America are wearing a cloth mask. That's the majority of kids in schools are right. Not all, but
That's why they're not effective, by the way.
right, correct. So what's interesting, and this is not like a controversial point. Like there's a guy named Michael Osterholm who is like a super kind of insidery guy. He was on Biden's COVID task force. He has publicly and repeatedly talked about how cloth masks are only marginally effective. You really need an N95. A person named Celine
This
Gounder.
is also for outgoing transmission.
It's for both, right? For the recipient and the
Fauci said it too.
yeah,
right,
we
so-
had this
right.
in the very beginning.
So-
I yelled at her about
Okay,
it.
so let's start establishing some things here. One is the difference between masks and Celine Gounder, who's an infectious disease person. She also was on Biden's task force. She's talked about this, and she tweeted a chart, and it showed that if both the recipient and I don't know what the term is, the infected person are both wearing a cloth mask, they estimated it at roughly 27 minutes of protection. You know, this is a total estimate, by the way, but
Not 26, not 28.
exactly. I mean, but anyway, now if you're a kid in school for 7 hours in a classroom with your peers, I don't know if how does that square with 27 minutes of supposed protection? So one of the things is the actual sort of like mechanistic effect of masks, how much they're, if you do a study on mannequins and these other things that they've done. Then the other thing is compliance. And there's a difference. If you'll notice, I keep saying the term mask mandate rather than masks, because human beings we are not the same thing as what occurs in a lab. And humans, particularly kids, but even adults, everybody, like wearing a mask is abnormal. It's annoying. It's weird. You want to take it off to breathe better if you want to talk to somebody. And that's, I think, another one of the big reasons why the mask mandates are not necessarily seeing a particular effect. Remember, this study was 90,000 students, and they did not see a statistically significant benefit. So part of it probably has to do with the type of mask that most of the people are wearing, and part of it probably has to do with the fact that masks are different from a mask mandate. And we don't know to what degree there's compliance, how people are wearing them. Are they pulling it down a lot? Are you touching your face a lot more often? Et cetera, et cetera.
So, do you want your kids to wear masks in school?
No,
You don't
absolutely.
want.
Well, so here's the other thing that I
You
talk
don't want
about.
them to wear N95s properly worn.
No. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll tell you why. So a couple reasons why. So number one, what I try to do in all of my reporting, I'm often looking outside the United States to Europe because it gives people some perspective that most of the journalists, I feel like, don't typically give us this broader context. And one of the things that I think a lot of people may be unaware of is no young children in Europe are wearing masks in schools. The World
What's
Health
young? What?
under age 6.
Okay, so
the
but
world-
there's a big difference.
I know. I'm gonna get
between,
there.
Like,
Well,
six-
He's going to get
So
there.
the World Health Organization has repeatedly, throughout the pandemic, said no one under age 6 should be wearing a mask, period. We just don't think it makes sense. The benefits are not worth it. They may not be able to comply properly, et cetera.
And because the risk of them being seriously ill is so low.
Correct, exactly. The cost benefit of doing it doesn't make sense. They say age 6 to 12, they don't recommend masks for them either, except under certain circumstances. And so there are a number of countries now in Europe where either the youngest kids are not wearing masks. Many of the countries, it's all the way up to age 12, they're not wearing masks. And there are now a number of countries in Europe where none of the kids, all the way up through high school, no one's wearing masks except maybe in certain circumstances, like in a hallway where it's like very crowded. So we have to start first. I think it's important context to just say, oh, wait a minute. If none of these people in Europe are doing this, how do we know that we're right and they're wrong? So without even saying automatically that one side is right or wrong, at minimum, I think the CDC and health authorities would owe the American people an explanation for why Europe is wrong and why we're right. And to me, what I find most persuasive is rather than a study, like the CDC study, that they published that I was referring to, is simply observational evidence. There is no evidence that kids in Europe are becoming seriously ill and infected or dying at any greater rate than they are in the United States, even though they have a wildly different guidance, regarding masking and a variety of other mitigation measures. That's something that we need to look at. And so observational evidence is powerful. So, and then the second answer to your question about why don't I want the kids to wear them is kids are at incredibly low risk from COVID. It's not zero. There are kids in the hospital. That's true. Kids even die, some of them. That's horrible. So COVID is real. I'm not denying that it's a thing. But the risks of COVID to children are no greater and, in fact, are less than many other things. More kids have died of the flu in many different flu seasons than they did from COVID. You can go on the CDC's website. This is not my opinion. I'm not making. So I think in 2018, 2019, 477 kids died of the flu. Where in the same span of time for COVID, it was like 400. It was around the same, or significantly lower. In the swine flu epidemic, or in 2009, they estimated 600 kids died.
I don't mean to be argumentative,
Sure,
but you can't do it by number of people who died. You have to do it by number of people as a percentage of people who had cases of it, right?
Well, you could. But the population was probably even lower.
No, out of X number of kids with COVID, this percentage died.
But isn't the larger point that we're at
if 450 kids had the flu and all
You're
450 died,
there's a case fatality rate versus population fatality rates, right? And death isn't the only thing we need to worry about.
Right,
We also
long-term effects that you don't really
know
about.
All of the evidence suggests that COVID does not pose a risk that's greater than the flu to children. And we certainly know more kids die drowning each year than have died of COVID. We know more suicide. I mean, the list goes on and on. Car accidents, your kids. So it's not that COVID isn't a risk. It is. But at a certain point, what I argue and what a number of the experts I've interviewed argue is we need to start asking, how does this risk compare to other risks to children? One of the biggest, I think, problems of the messaging during the pandemic from the public health authorities has to not accurately express the age stratification of risk. That COVID is incredibly serious to older people and serious to people with underlying conditions, and miraculously, it is incredibly benign to almost all children. The CDC estimates that approximately 50% of kids who had COVID are asymptomatic. I mean, that's pretty stunning that half the kids who get it don't even know they have it.
But what about the note? First of all, I think that has been pretty well emphasized. I think most people you speak to are aware of that. But what I've heard,
not to the extent.
Shaking your head.
I think it's a little bit safer for kids. The extent is extraordinary.
Well, but people make the point that kids are a vector, Victor. So that airplane reference. So that kids could get it and bring it home and in that way. Make the pandemic worse.
Yeah, but now that people are vaccinated, that's apparently it.
That's right. I mean, I think that probably was a pretty reasonable argument to make before vaccines came on the scene. But at this point, any adult who's not vaccinated that's their choice. But I don't see why children should have a burden imposed on them to protect someone who chose not to get vaccinated. Secondarily, most of the evidence shows that kids are far less likely to infect an adult than the other way around, than adults infecting children.
I would disagree with you on the point that you made that people are unaware of that it's fairly benign for children, because that does seem to have been Noam, do you agree or disagree?
Well,
it seemed to have been a widespread.
It is widespread, but there's also these polls that show how as people are more and more liberal and progressive, they have wildly
correct
liberals
are far less correct on their estimates on the risk to children than conservatives are.
Yeah.
Wow,
it's like
that seems-
completely off the charts.
Yeah.
Liberals think it is
it's enormous cognitive
far
bias.
more
Yeah.
dangerous to kids than
Yeah.
it is.
The media doesn't really cover the cases where conservatives are actually more accurate in their
This is
perception
one
of
of the.
things.
This is
Oh,
one of the
the love of
circumstances.
God.
Right.
Come
No, it's true.
on.
No, it's absolutely true. You'll hear headlines.
Ridiculous.
X number of conservatives believe blah blah blah. But this is the case where liberals are like totally whacked out and alarmist. And
It's inherently hypocritical, but also we're at peak cognitive bias right now. If you attach yourself to a notion that is largely emotional without the data, the underlying data, you arrive at screening out everything that doesn't substantiate your already held emotional opinion.
Yeah, but I don't actually agree with him.
Well, you're wrong. He's right.
So let me just say,
No, please push back as hard.
Swag is right.
I mean,
Push back as hard as you can.
so
Swag knows.
So let me first a little tangent here. So this thing about N95s is very, very important. So
Okay.
I even found that this mask comes in a small, because this is the real deal, right? This is for people listening out there. This is this Scotch, a 3M 1860 back of the head.
They use for painting, right? For painting.
I know, but like when you put this on, you know you're wearing a mask.
3M are the people, of course, that
they,
brought us
they make it.
Post-it notes.
It's an 1860, and they have an S model, which is small. And I bought those for my kids, but they're wearing the K95s. Anyway, but I want on our local Ardsley Facebook group.
You live in Ardsley?
Yeah, I live in Ardsley. Where do you live?
Hastings on Hudson.
Oh, we're neighbors.
Rivertown,
I knew that.
Rivertown.
That's the way.
So on my local Ardsley Facebook group, I posted that, listen, the kids are going to go back and they're going to have to be wearing masks. And I posted the data. I said, shouldn't we be insisting that if we're going to go through this, that all the kids and the teachers wear K or N95 masks? Because otherwise it's a
Those are
total
the ones
waste
that
of
are
time.
effective, right.
They would not post my post in the group. I was censored
Wow.
from the group.
Wow.
That's great. Usually the censorship goes in the other direction. You know, I was called like, why do you want to murder children? If you question it. So
Yeah.
But
it's interesting to
we
hear
had-
the censorship in the other
We
direction.
had experts on in the beginning of the pandemic,
Yeah.
and we had this exact same conversation, which is that these masks are effective, and the other, or significantly
effective,
more
yeah.
effective.
Well, I think what's going on here, and then I says, is that I guess what they're saying is that when you factor in how much lower the risk is to children of serious illness, and how much less likely it is that children are going to wear the masks properly, at some point you come down to that it's more trouble than it's worth. It doesn't actually produce any effect, and I can believe that's true. However, that really doesn't answer the question of whether my kid should wear a mask if I can be realistically have a realistic belief that my kid will wear the mask properly. And I think that if I believe my kid will wear the mask properly,
and it's an appropriate, and it's a K95, and it's a
then I think that
KN95 too.
protecting it from he or she will be just as protected as an adult would be. And yes, they say it's less risky when kids get COVID, but this is where you lose me a little bit because I'm really worried about the long-term effects. There are other examples of things like RSV, for instance, where they find out 20 years later that actually there is a correlation between having a certain childhood illness and having certain neurological problems, cognitive, like
You're talking about
ADD.
externalities, but doesn't...
Wait, but and the final point is this, and this I think is lost. If we didn't have a vaccine, which was imminent, that Fauci said fall, not even winter, that the vaccine should be approved to children. If this was going to go on as far as the eye could see, I'd say, yeah, maybe this is not worth putting the kids through it. But is it worth putting them through it for 6 or 8 weeks?
It's not
Why
going to be
take the
6 or 8
chance?
It's not going to be 6 or 8
Well,
Even
if they can get
6 or 8
vaccinated,
months.
no, but if they can
Even
get
if
Fauci just this week said he expects the vaccine. Well, you don't know that, but I mean, yeah.
Well, he's not. First of all, he's at NIAID, which is part of the NIH. They are not involved. The FDA approves vaccines, so Fauci.
But they can be emergency
No,
authorization.
I know. I mean, I'm sure Fauci's got the inside, the red phone. He can talk. So I'm not saying he doesn't know, but
I just spoke to him.
yeah. So So a couple of things. I mean, these are all. First of all, I think it makes more sense if you're going to have kids wearing masks. I mean, I'm hesitant to even say this, but like actually wear a mask that we know works.
For
so that's
sure,
actually, so what you're saying is
100%.
actually more sensible. But here's why. But I would take it in the other direction, which is that again, when you're looking at kids in Europe, there's no evidence that they are falling ill at a greater rate than kids are in America, number one. Number two, and you're right, other illnesses, all sorts of, if you get a really horrible case of influenza or RSV, I think I'm going to mispronounce, but it's sequela, which is sort of like long-term symptoms. Your body, is fighting off like a horrible virus. Whether coronavirus is not unusual in that it can cause some long-term symptoms. So, but I guess what I would ask you is, and there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's about each person's own sort of like risk tolerance or how they want to live life is. But you don't have your kids wearing a mask normally because RSV has been around before COVID. So is influenza. So is a zillion other things. I assume you don't want your kids wearing masks or maybe you do for that normally. So we have to ask ourselves, what kind of life do because there are people now floating the idea of, well, we think kids should wear masks every winter during flu season.
Right.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I would say that I think we have learned a little lesson from Asia that if there is like I remember when my daughter got RSV, it was a time when they're telling us RSV is going around now.
Right.
It might be actually wise during flare-ups of certain childhood illnesses to have our kids wearing masks. I'm not like Mr. Mask Wearer, but they do that in Asia.
Yeah.
And,
What about that case in Mississippi? Forget Europe for a second. There was just a big story a few weeks ago that there was no masks in this school in Mississippi. Do you know the one that I'm talking about?
I don't, but it's okay. Go ahead.
And a whole bunch of
of kids got sick.
No. A whole bunch of people died, and they had to close down like the entire school district for like 2 weeks.
I mean,
I can pull it up. I can.
No,
find it.
I
But
believe
isn't
you.
the blind that he's talking about all of Europe? What's it matter what went on? in
Well, no.
Right.
Well, what would be all of Europe?
He said all of
if I-
Europe.
No, but she's making it. If there was a school where a bunch of kids died, I'd like to know.
No.
we
So
need
I
to know
believe
why.
you. No,
Well, a
here's
bunch
the-
of kids died or teachers?
She doesn't know. Perry
and were they vaccinated? No, but
She really reads memes most of the time.
here,
so.
Okay, but all of Europe. He can say all of Europe, and everybody just goes along with it.
I mean,
He sounds like he knows what he's talking about.
no, go on the world.
Zweig knows his stuff.
You can click through if you go to the national websites for in the UK, in Ireland, in Denmark, in Sweden.
No, but stay on this Mississippi.
Okay, yeah.
You
So-
look up the Mississippi.
I'm
So what?
looking it up.
So
Is
what I-
Periel authorized to? My understanding was that Periel was authorized to continue the to chime in on the current subject, but not to completely go off on.
No. But I'm glad you raised this. I'm glad you raised this, and here's why. This is an anecdote, and what I think people need to be aware of is, number one, is an anecdote true, and then number two, if it's true, is it representative of a broader phenomenon? So that very well may be true. What you're saying, I'm not denying the Mississippi thing, but the question is, does that represent kind of more broadly what's happening? Right? So there will always be a school with an outbreak. There will always be a kid who gets really sick or dies. We could find that every single week. There could be some news story about an outbreak in a school. We're always going to find that. This is going to be an endemic thing that doesn't necessarily, there's something like 60 million children in America. So you're talking about there was an outbreak in a school in Mississippi. That's horrible. We don't want that to
She
happen.
said people died.
But that's horrible too. But
No.
we also don't know that has a relation to or not to mask wearing. It may or it may not.
Yeah,
we don't
but-
know. This
but-
is an anecdote about a thing that happened. That's
So let me say
terrible.
two things. If a bunch of young kids
Well,
died in
I'm
a school of
seeing
COVID,
there was a fatality, but how many? I see one fatality.
oh, yeah, she's not a good reader. That's the problem.
Um,
But it's true, Perio.
I see one fatality, unless you're showing me there were more, which is tragic enough.
So, but here I have a little pet theory here, a pet worry. You tell me.
I'm not familiar with the case, so we don't know. Did the case originate in the school, or there are a number of
20,000
studies that show
Mississippi
that
students.
schools have an equal to or lower rate of transmission. There was a big study that was done in
Here.
Wisconsin, published by the CDC itself. The schools, they were in with really, really high transmission rates in the community, and the schools stayed open, and the transmission rates were much lower in the schools. So I'm just saying there's not. I don't know the details of the story, but I think to me,
I don't really either.
okay, that's to me what I think is more salient and what people need to, because, and this ties into your stuff about the missing girl and stuff like that, is sort of the question about what is news, right? And when you're talking about medical stuff and stuff like that, when it is an anecdote, that's very resonant to people. It's it's emotional. In the beginning of the pandemic, the New York Times ran this giant feature on some like young guy who was in the hospital. I don't know if it was for COVID or for MIS-C. That's the inflammatory syndrome. And it's like you pick just this sort of like handsome young healthy boy in the hospital, and it was this like 2,000 word piece. That's what people remember, and they're freaking out. But what you don't know is the 60 million kids who are fine. But we remember that, and it resonates with us. But it's sort of the same thing. Remember in the 1990s when like crime started to go down in New York. But if you look at the coverage on the nightly news, when people used to watch like the nightly news, there's always going to be a murder. There's always going
That's
to be
what I
an
meant
outbreak.
about peak cognitive bias. And
Right.
the underlying consideration is also this notion of zeroism, the notion of reducing liability to the degree that that's the most important, or that's the priority. The externalities associated with that will be all kinds of anxieties, all kinds of psychological externalities, all kinds of financial externalities. And so the dangers of zeroism are something that would have to be considered in
Most isms are bad, right?
Yes, of course.
I guess what I'm asking, because I think your point, I'm really glad you're pushing me. Because your mindset, I think, is interesting, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but what I would push back on you
wrong.
is to ask yourself, but
person.
what is the end point? Because you're saying it's a vaccine, but listen, just because the vaccine's approved, we know that a large portion of kids aren't going to get vaccinated.
No, but
so then what?
But as long as my kids
you
are
just
vaccinated,
feel safe. Then you'll feel like. Did you know that an unvaccinated child is at a lower risk than a vaccinated adult?
So here's something that that's always in the back of my mind. You tell me if you've heard anything about this. I haven't really heard it discussed, and I could be totally out to lunch on this. But I know a lot of people who had COVID, and they got better right away, but they still had deficits in their taste and smell. Sometimes this lingers for a long time, and that's pretty common. And it occurred to me that that's some sort of synaptical connection or some sort of neurological connection which is damaged. But it's very obviously damaged because you can tell that you can't smell or taste as you used to. So, but what if that was cognitive? Could you identify permanent damage, a slight
2 IQ points.
yeah, or you would say I'm a little more forget and I worry that what that tells me is that it's possible that COVID can do a certain kind of damage, which is not detectable, or it's possible that it could. It's detectable if you're lucky enough to have it be where you smell, but if it's just where you do math, I don't know. And I say, why do I just don't want my kids to get. We have 100 years of experience with these other diseases, right? We don't have 100 years.
Well, we actually coronaviruses have been with us for a very long time.
But not
this is
a coronavirus.
SARS-CoV-2 is a coronavirus, and we know.
I never heard of long blah 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 for any other coronavirus or yeah.
Well, the common cold is a coronavirus.
Yes, so
That's what
it's
Trump
one of
said.
it's one of them. And interestingly enough, coronaviruses are generally pretty benign to kids. So and this is no different. This one, fortunately,
Yeah.
What you're saying actually makes sense, right? There could be some lingering thing, but the way I view it is, but again, you could have that from any number of serious respiratory illnesses, and you don't have your how old were your kids again? 9,
8, and
right.
You don't listen.
So for the previous
9, 8, and 4.
Right. So for the previous decade, you weren't having your 9-year-old wear a mask all the time, for fear of if the child got the flu, that there might be a long-term sequela.
But
because any serious illness can affect your immune system in a way and lead to some long-term.
But I think what Noam is
consequences.
saying is that COVID-19, we don't have much experience with it, and there does seem to be a little bit different in. Noam knows not one, not two, but several people with deficits in taste or smell since getting COVID. And so he's saying to himself, this seems to be a little bit different than the viruses with which we are familiar.
Yeah, but that's not that doesn't counter what Mr. Zweig is saying. It's a layer of consideration, but the externalities associated with extreme policies that aren't substantiated by data are theoretically just as negative. They're both rabbit holes. There's no way to prove either
Look,
one.
I pride myself on following the data, and I'm
Noam's usually good about the data.
I'm quite aware that there's a PTSD that's associated with this whole subject,
Yes.
which I can't wring out of my mind. I just can't. And possibly people can overreact in the opposite way too. But
Why do you think so many people in Europe have such a wildly different approach to this than we do here? And that I'm asking that non-rhetorically. Like, I'm curious. Like, do they why wouldn't they share your concerns?
No, that's a totally valid point.
Because I think about that all the time. Why are they approaching this with they don't want kids to die.
Yeah.
In
Nobody wants
England.
their kids to die.
And I don't even want my kids to get really sick. Like even short of dying. No one wants bad things.
I got to no one.
And so I'm curious if you have why is it that they're approaching it so differently? And I'm not saying your concerns are invalid, but again, for me, it's just placing it in context with all of the other risks of harm to your children. I assume your kids go in a car with you. Your kids do all sorts of things that are.
I let my kids drive the car. I'm going to tell you the answer to your question because
Tesla with some autopilot capability.
The question you were just asking was a question that was in the bubble over my head while you were talking at some point, and I guess the answer to that is I just don't know if the European data. I mean, is this data from places where they had serious outbreaks like we've had? If all the parents are really, really good about wearing masks in a community, then the risk of the kids getting it is so much less. Anyway, comes from the adult. I mean, there could be so many things. And I'll just finish by saying, in the last year, so many things have turned out to be not as originally reported. So many things have been mistakes. I just feel like we
playing it safe.
Yeah, I feel like playing it safe for the next couple of months. My kids are not bitching about the masks. They're happy to wear them. Even my 4-year-old wears it. He tolerates it fine. I'm like, well, what's to be lost,
Then, well, I guess you're talking about two different things. One is, should your kids be allowed to wear a mask? Of course they should. Anyone who wants their kid to wear, that. But the second question is, should that be imposed on all children? Because what happens if someone else has a different risk assessment? Some people take their kids, hot rodding or whatever, or like riding BMX, bikes. Other people are like, that's too dangerous for my kid. Some people might not want their kid to swim in the ocean. Now, I understand the analogy breaks down because this is a virus that's contagious. And they're saying, well, you're not just endangering yourself, you're endangering others. But again, we circle back to all the adults have had the option to be vaccinated. Kids are at incredibly low risk relative to everyone else. It's not zero. And to my mind, if you just look that more kids die of the flu in many years, and by the way, that's in a flu season where notice how the government repeatedly talks about COVID numbers. It's I know I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it's a cumulative number. It's now, a year and a half? Somehow we keep comparing this cumulative number to other things that are just for a particular season. The time frame. I'm just saying it's worth looking at the risks of this for children in context relative to other risks that they have faced throughout time and face now.
So you are mixing two things, or in a certain way, which is that on the one hand you're saying it's very, very low risk to children. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to say, well, this is nothing to worry about at all, then the mask doesn't even matter. Then the reason we don't wear masks is because you're protecting against something you don't need to protect against.
I didn't say it's nothing to worry about, but does it outweigh the harms of kids for a year and a half not being able to see each other's faces?
Let's just say, for the sake of argument, even though it may not be the case, that we don't want any kids to get COVID. Whatever the risk of COVID is, it's something we think is significant enough we don't want it. So without getting that they don't get serious illness. I would say that based on the fact that masks are effective in adults, significantly effective, that alone would warrant imposing it on.
But when you say masks are effective, that's an adult wearing a certain type of mask, an adult who might be popping into a store for 10 minutes, not in a room for 7 hours.
I would say, in healthcare, I would say it is worth imposing it on all kids if we also make sure that we're doing this like adults and we use proper masks and the proper fitting.
So you want kids to wear an N9? I mean, why aren't you wearing it right now? Why aren't you wearing the N95
Excellent question, Mr. Joy.
Why? If you look at the, I forget, I'm going to mispronounce her name, but Biden's press secretary.
Psaki?
Jen Psaki. She doesn't wear a mask, and there's a zillion videos where you see these school board members talking like, hold on a second.
I will tell you.
Let me take the mask off. It's so hard to speak with.
But I will tell you why I'm not wearing a mask.
Right, okay.
I got a third shot of Moderna 3 weeks ago.
Boom! This guy's like bulletproof here.
This guy's had an erection for 21 days. He's been hard for 3 weeks, and he's complaining about externalities.
And Moderna, as you know, is 95% effective against infection.
Kaboom!
Yeah. As opposed,
okay.
So everybody should get get a Moderna.
But again,
I
so
do think
the
that you
data
have to
out of
say
the UK showed that kids who are unvaccinated were at a lower risk than even vaccinated
All
adults.
right.
So I don't know if they compared it to like the
But
booster.
the notion aren't there underlying things at play here? The notion of zeroism, the notion of trying to reduce liability to the degree that lots more children now, from what I understand, get allergies than was the case in the future because of the way they're protected by their parents.
It's the hygiene hypothesis.
It's a hygiene hypothesis. Yeah. I mean, this is a rabbit hole of sorts. And if you look at Facebook data, young women are killing themselves at a higher rate. I mean, is it as bad as smoking to observe social media? None of this ends. And so there's a point at which the overall cost-benefit analysis is always going to be anecdotal. You can never supply enough data to form definitive opinions around this. And you have to occupy. Mr. Zweig gets my vote. You're all out.
No, I find it hard to believe that your kids would wear a mask if they were the only ones in school wearing it. In fact, I find it impossible
and a
to
tight-fitting
That's a good point.
N95.
I think you're I've spoke to a dozen medical people, and I'm not saying you're wearing the KN95 incorrectly, but they are when they're worn properly, it is not comfortable. Mm-hmm. And the idea it's not to wear that for 7 hours a day. And again, that's why some of these studies, I think, have found that there wasn't even with 90,000 kids, they didn't find this statistically significant benefit. Now, does that mean if you jack the number up to 500,000 or 1 million that you'd see a benefit? Perhaps. It makes intuitive sense that masks are going to work to some extent. I'm not saying that masks don't have a value, but the questions are people going to comply and wear them in the proper fashion for that duration of time?
Yeah, they are. The kids do. I mean, I have a son, and there are certain masks that have been approved by his school, and they are, by and large, the KN95.
Are they all KN95?
No, but there is a list of them that are. I mean, don't
Ridiculous.
shake your head.
I'm shaking my head because why would they approve anything but a KN95?
Because some of them have the filters, the KN95 filters
That's a KN95.
inside. Okay, but
so
yeah,
if you feel confident that there will be, because
I feel
there's
like
a
it's
study
better than the alternative.
There's a study that came out, the CDC put out. Have you guys heard the Marin County study out of California? And there was like this exposure in the school. All the kids were wearing masks. There was a mask mandate.
Oh, yeah.
They had a HEPA filter in the school. And guess what? The teacher wasn't vaccinated, and
that's
then it
insane.
spread around. But the kids were all wearing masks.
But the
Kids
teacher should have to be
Right.
No,
vaccinated.
so the kids got it even though they were wearing masks. Is that what you're saying?
I believe so. Yeah. We can. I don't. But if you look up the.
That's like me doing research.
Yeah,
now.
sorry. I've got like 50.
What happens to
I've
your
got like 50 different studies. Man.
What happens to your lecture about anecdotes?
Right. But that's a study that the CDC put out that they're and
Yeah, but it's an anecdote of a particular
right.
classroom, right?
No, that's
Yeah.
a very good point.
Yeah.
Thank you know what?
You're welcome.
You're right. I mention it only because the CDC puts that out as evidence. And interestingly, what they drew from that was, see, masks work, but the mask mandate didn't work because the teacher pulled the mask down during class. So I know you're saying your
That
kids
doesn't work. If you pull the mask down, it doesn't work.
So what I'm saying, so to me, the moral of that study, even though it's an anecdote, is that what that showed, even though the CDC said, look, masks work, is that an unvaccinated teacher pulled her mask down during class. That at a certain point, human beings, particularly children, want to see each other's faces. And I don't think there's anything I could say that would persuade you to not be nervous about your kids and say, hey, you know what? It's not a big deal. Just let them wear a mask a little bit longer. Why not just play it safe? And that's you're
not wrong.
Yeah,
Aren't you Jewish?
What
Jew doesn't think that way?
So here's the interesting thing. I am like a fairly anxious, neurotic type.
You're one of
a lot
us.
things. But when you look at the evidence from this, and then when you look at it in context from other places in the world, and look at it in context of other risks, I let my kids go swimming. They love swimming in the ocean. They'll swim in a pool. Don't really like a lake so much, but something like 700 something kids typically drown every year from swimming. We know thousands of kids die in automobile accidents, but we all put our kids in a car, drive on the highway. There are different risks associated with everything. I'm not saying it's wildly unreasonable for you to want to say, hey, let's just play it safe until they get vaccinated. But I'm saying that doesn't necessarily align with all the other risks that are imposed on your children in their daily lives, and you let them, and that's okay. We do different things, but like, if you live in the city, I mean, walking as a pedestrian in New York City, someone gets hit by a car, what is it, every day or something? There's different.
Is that true?
I don't know if it's every day, but there's an enormous amount of fatalities from people being hit by cars. And by the way,
hit by cars every day.
Guess what cars have the most fatalities imposed on pedestrians?
Tesla.
Giant SUVs and like pickup trucks, stuff like that. But so we don't say you're not allowed to drive an SUV, even though you are endangering people more than if you drove a little sedan.
Hold on, but
we do all sorts, because the argument though is that like you're endangering other people.
Hold on.
We do all
But
sorts of things that endanger other people.
It's self-evident, Mr.
Wait,
Zweig. These people are crazy.
No. Of course, I've made similar arguments to one or the same arguments that you're making. So I just want to, but I didn't make them in the same context. So yes, all these things have risks. And now you always using absolute numbers, but so I don't know how many events of swimming there are for this. But that's not even my point.
That's a good point. You're right. That's a relevant point.
But another point is that it's compared to what the alternative is. So I could not ever put my kid in a car. But the idea of a life, just never transportation. This is
You're saying
not
you
worth
have
it.
to put them in a car to go to certain places, but you don't have to have them in school
and
without
never
them.
swimming without little risk. I mean, that swimming is a big benefit and can save your life. And the illogical extreme of this is they say, well, you shouldn't eat because certain people die of food poisoning.
Right.
But you have to eat.
Right.
So you have to take that risk.
You're
right?
saying you don't have to wear a mask. So that's something that can be
So
avoided.
like if the risk of COVID is it's a short term and is a big unknown factor there, I would still opt for wearing the mask. But
But I think
I'm ready to be persuaded.
So from talking to some of my sources, I think what's going, and I'm not a prognosticator, but what they have told me is I think people are vastly misjudging when this is going to like wind down. One of the people who I talk with a lot is an infectious disease specialist, and she's an implementation is her expertise, and de-implementation is very hard to do. Once you impose certain things, it's really hard to unwind that. I think you're misjudging when the masks are just going to magically come.
Yeah.
Let's say the kid vaccines are, approved next week. The mask ain't coming off anytime soon after that. The mandates will remain because
But I would support you at that
because
point.
there's going to be a huge portion of kids whose parents refuse to get them vaccinated. There's going to be people who will say, but hey, this is only approved for age 5 to 12. What about these kids have siblings at home? How dare you send your kid to school not wearing a mask when there are other kids who have a 2-year-old sibling at home
fair
who could be
point.
That's the
infected by
same
that,
reason-
and they have
that's
an old person who lives in a multi-generational home.
But it's a
this
fair
is not
point.
going to end immediate. Like, so
That's the
there's
same reason Noam doesn't give us more money for doing stand-up, because he's worried that he can't dial it back.
right. So I just think there's
Well, once he gives us a raise, and then all of a sudden he has less audience members, now he's stuck giving us more money.
Listen,
Wages are sticky down.
a lot of this is symptomatic too of some underlying socioeconomic problems. But yeah, I mean, inflation is inflating away the value that people are able to create that don't own assets that aren't correlated with the.
How do we get to this?
I'm just saying.
You're talking about
salary?
I think he's talking about the comedy rate.
Not at all.
Oh.
No. I'm talking about much of what's taking place politically is an argument over the symptoms of an underlying challenge. You're arguing about the paint job, and the underlying problem is that we've got a transmission issue, and the car isn't moving correctly. But anyway, we'll go back to the masks. But Mr. Zweig is right. I've ruled.
So let me say one other point about masks. So I hope it sounds like I persuaded you a little bit looking at you. The
You
notion
haven't
that,
persuaded me even the slightest.
no,
And yet she's turned on nonetheless. Don't worry about that, Mr. Zweig. She puts out.
No, not
You
persuade you to not wear masks. I'm saying the idea that they're going to like come off once the pediatric vaccines
no, I
approved.
don't
They're
think
not.
so.
The mandates
Ariel
are
likes a
going
good
to be
row.
here for because the same logic remains, which is there's still potentially